Thank you all for being up nice and early. We're going to try to go through our agenda and be able to participate in our demonstration in a few minutes. That'll be great. Let's go for the approval of the meeting minutes for January 12th, item number 1. Are there any modifications or changes to the minutes? A motion to approve by Mr. Voss, a second by Mr. Morrison. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is that unanimous? Any opposed? That is unanimous. Our item number 2 is our public comments. Do we have any speakers for public comment? Seeing none, we'll close the public comments. I want to make one announcement that will be brought up by Victoria, but there's some exciting news coming forward on our. We have gotten a request from the Secretary of Foreign Relations of Mexico to attend our meeting on February 23rd. It's the Honorable Luis Vidigaray. And so we are doing everything we can to provide a venue and an opportunity for him to come in and talk to the board. This is a very significant thing. He's, I think, almost number 2 in the Mexican government. He's very high placed, and to have him want to come and talk to our region is very significant. So that's something we're excited about. We'll move to item number 3, our review of draft board agendas, and Victoria.
As the chair noted, we'd also like to add an item under the chair's report to accommodate the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Mexico. So we'll be adding that item as well. Under reports, item number 16 is the One Vista Lagoon Enhancements Project. In order to allow adequate time to reach out to the stakeholders, we're requesting that we move this to future meetings and move on to this agenda. Item number 17 is the proposed amendments to board policies and bylaws. This came to the EC in November, and we will seek action from committee in February. Item number 18 is FY19, FY2023 Transnet and Transit-related revenues. This has gone to Transportation Committee. Item number 20 is the regional housing needs assessment determination for the San Diego region. These are the regional numbers, not the local jurisdiction numbers. We're waiting for this information to move forward. And that's followed by 2 closed sessions related to the Midcoast Corridor project. And in addition to these 2 closed sessions, we'd also like to add another closed session related to La Jolla Village Square Midcoast Station. That concludes this meeting. If there's any questions.
Are there any questions on that? We'll let Victoria take a breath. Is there any changes or questions regarding this particular agenda item or this proposed agenda? Could I have a motion on approving? Mr. Wells and Mr. Morrison. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's unanimous.
So we'll be starting with
8:30.
All right, that brings us to March 9th draft board policy agenda. Item number 1 is the public comment communications and member comments. Under reports, we have item number 2, which is the San Diego Forward 2019-2015 regional plan and regional growth forecast. We use the Department of Finance numbers, and we'll be going over how we will be implementing those into the RTP for jobs and growth. Item number 3 is the regional housing needs assessment, addressing housing legislation and providing some information regarding the NEPA process. And then item number 4 for discussion is the SANDAG independent performance auditor, and we're asking direction to figure out other alternatives for the performance auditor position that would be a firm or a Item number 5 is the Trader 2018 bond issuance. So this is related to the funding strategy for the coast. So we're bringing the information regarding the financial strategy and for approval at a subsequent date. This concludes the board policy meeting in March.
Thank you. I'll ask a dumb question. Is there any possibility that if one agenda gets too packed, that we can move into the policy, move some of these items into the policy meeting? Because I see the 23rd is just extreme.
Yes, you can always take action. You cannot take action on an item unless it's noticed, but you always have the flexibility to remove an item from an agenda.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any comments or changes in the proposed agenda for March 9th? Could I have a motion?
Move
From Mr. Voss and Mr. Morrison. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That was unanimous. Okay, thank you. Okay, item number 4, preliminary development of the fiscal year 2019 program budget. And we have Andre and Sandy. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. So over the last several months, the project managers, budget coordinators, and department directors have been working on developing the budget for fiscal year 2019. Today's status report summarizes where we are with overall objectives, as well as defining the scope of the planning program, the overall work program, the operations program, capital program, and funding that is needed to support these efforts. The annual program budget is started by developing the agency's strategic goals and areas of emphasis. This is something that staff notes during the year based on recommendations from the board during the last year. And these are described in attachment 1, shown on page 7 of the report and 22 of your tablets. So as the chair mentioned yesterday during the round table report, the very last session that we had, one of the key initiatives for fiscal year 2019 is that the continued implementation of AD 805 and the Plan of Excellence. This plan focuses on improving the credibility and the integrity of the organization through changes to governance and oversight functions and ensuring transparency communications with both inside and outside the agency. The draft budget will identify the OWP and administration budget items that will implement the Plan of Excellence. So So the current proposed OWP projects are described in attachment 2, starting on page 9 of this report and 29 of your tablets. This is the listing of the project objective statements for each project, including those activities that will be emphasized in fiscal year 2019. Attachment 3, starting on page 27 of the report and page 42 of your tablet, lists the scope of the capital projects, including location, construction, and completion dates. One of the things you may note in your report today, we don't actually have any dollar amounts. That's because staff is working on finalizing the funding, but we're confident that we'll be able to bring a balanced budget back to you in the draft budget in early March. In general, though, we can say that the budget is about the same as last year. The only potential increases, as we described in the lightning round of this session at Jose Susan and I had, was the Mid-Coast project. It's kind of ramping up in 2019 and 2020, so you'll see some increases overall in the capital program. So looking at the funding sources, our Transportation Development Act, the TVA, and Transnet are significant funding sources for both the OWP and capital programs. The current funding environment is the same as the last several years, where it's been kind of leveling off. We project approximately 3% growth for fiscal year 2019. These forecasts are developed by our economic team, along with community services, who are our sales tax consultants. We also take these numbers back to our county and to the transit agencies that control the numbers. And like I mentioned, we're coming up with a growth rate of 3% for this next year. The good news is for fiscal year 2018, we are projected at 2.5% growth. We're actually coming in stronger the last 7 months, more closer to 4%. Our federal and state recurring revenues are projected to increase by 2.5% based on authority numbers that we received from both the federal and state government. The FAST Act appropriations have the potential to provide increased funding of 5%. In addition, that SB1 has provided approximately $1 million in formula funds through the Caltrans planning grants, along with several competitive grants for both the OWP and capital program. Our strongest growth is expected to come from our operational activities. We anticipate approximately 6.5% increase in the I-15 corridor and 4% for SR-125. Sandy will now describe some of the highlights of next year's planning, capital, and operations programs.
In the fiscal year 2019 overall work program, several new items will be introduced to support the plan of excellence, including a new auditor and audit committee, enhanced data quality control, and governance processes. These new processes will ensure that data flowing to and from the agency's models are reviewed in an independent and systematic manner. Ongoing activities in the budget include the development of the 2019 regional plan, which is scheduled for adoption in the fall of 2019. Implementing the current 2015 regional plan, we're providing grants to local jurisdictions and continuing efforts on habitat conservation, energy, and climate planning. And through the Autonomous Vehicle Proving Ground project, continue the efforts to improve mobility, reduce congestion, and greenhouse gas emissions. In regional operations, we'll complete the upgrades to the empty roadway toll collection systems for the SR-125 and I-15 express lane, as well as complete the implementation of a centralized backup disposal system. In the state program, we'll continue the implementation of the call-box right-sizing plan that began in fiscal year 2018. In the capital program, construction is expected to begin on the the I-5 Point Drive improvements, realigning both Campus Point and Point Drive between the I-5 and Tennessee Avenue. In segment 2A of State Route 11, the 4-lane toll highway between Enrico Fleming Drive and the future Hotel Mesa Bridge. Bike projects are underway, with several beginning construction in fiscal year 19 and others finishing up on the opening schedule for next year. Also in capital, the Makers project will continue in fiscal year 19 and 20, being the most capital intensive. Completion is expected on the I-5 Dillon Drive project. The final 6 Superloop transit stations in University City and South Bay Rapid, which will include 11 stations along a 21-mile corridor from the Hotel Mesa border area to downtown San Diego. And now Andre will discuss the next steps.
Sure. Go ahead.
Projects to them before? Are you going to send projects to that audit committee before that comes to the board, or after? Or how? I didn't understand how you were describing the way that works.
Just to understand the question, I guess we're working on setting up the audit committee currently. As Victoria mentioned, will either be we'll hire an internal staff person or be an external firm. And so once that firm is established, then I guess your question was.
The question was because I thought I heard you saying that as we do projects, you send it to the that audit committee, and so the question is: are you talking about before it comes to the board or after? Because it doesn't make sense before.
No, we're just including resources in next year's budget for the audit.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
We're just setting everything up, and it'll all come to the board for review. So.
Okay, so our next steps are that we will return to this committee in March with the draft fiscal year 2019 program budget, which will include, along with what we described today, the administration budget as well as the board budget, plus we'll give an update on the pension funding, as well as we'll talk about the new Section 115 trust that we just opened this last year. We'll also review our contingency funds in each one of the programs. Then we'll seek authorization to distribute the document to our funding agencies for their review and approval, and we'll recommend acceptance by the draft by the Board of Directors meeting on March 23rd. At that board meeting, we will also have all the directors present the highlights of their areas and how their departments help in achieving the strategic goals set by the Board of Directors. Staff will then return in May with the final proposed budget and seeking your recommendation of the board approval on the May 25th board meeting. So at that point, this concludes our presentation. Sandy and I and the rest of the directors are here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Reactions, discussions from the committee. Anybody have any thoughts or?
Good question. How much sales tax we get a year from Transnet? Under the 2.5%.
Yeah, so currently we're running about $290 million annually.
So it's 300 million. If we get 3.8%, then it's 50% more. So it's another $100 million.
And we're expecting approximately 3% increase. So from 290 million will be over 300.
Right, 100%, $100 million more. Thank you.
This is an awful lot that's in this report. There's an awful lot of things we're doing. It's not only operations but capital. So we need to be really looking at this carefully and make sure everybody's comfortable with it as it moves forward. Go ahead, Jim.
I just had a question on here. For the projects, is there all 2019 projects that are going to be underway? Is that my understanding?
The projects that you see in the capital program are ones that are going to have an impact on our budget this year. Some are starting, some are underway, some are kind of on the closeout stage.
Okay, so I was just trying to find, I noticed there's a lot of projects region-wide in here, and I just to point out, like with my Me Too hat on, there's nothing here on the 78.
Oh, no.
I did it before Sam could.
You got it in before Sam did. Okay.
Still meaningful.
And one of the things I'd like to encourage us to do is in the presentation, visualize or show what stuff is ongoing, what stuff is new, and what stuff is being closed or completed. I think it would be nice to have a better feel for completions, ongoing, or new stuff that we're starting. So it's just how we present it. You can't do it very well in a written report, but maybe in the actual presentations we can show the board that. Other discussions?
Also, it would be nice to have one-page revenue. This year's budget and next year, as we see just the main item, revenue and expenses variances.
Okay, good. Any other comments? Okay, this is for discussion. Thank you very much. Appreciate the report. We will move on to item number 5. This is the draft 2018 legislative program, and Victoria.
Draft 2018 legislative program serves as a roadmap for federal, state, and legislative policy decisions. This year, there's one proposed modification that's being suggested. Last year, we added legislative goal 13B to the support post section of the program, which was to denote the efforts to advance autonomous vehicles and emerging technologies. Since the report was provided in January 2017, the region received designation from the U.S. DOT as one of 10 designated autonomous vehicle proving ground. And then in October of 2017, the proving grounds had their kickoff, and now they're open for testing. Elevating goal 13B could enable the region to take advantage of additional testing opportunities. For one example, some jurisdictions in the state of California are able to test certain types of vehicles called neighborhood electric vehicles. Currently, San Diego County does not have that authority. So by elevating this goal, we would better reflect what we are working on in the legislative program, and this would allow us to potentially pursue legislation to allow for these types of testing and afford the ability of the proving grounds to take advantage of this opportunity. So with that, staff recommends elevating this goal to reflect a more active role in shaping policies. Once approved, the executive committee will keep the executive committee advised on the latest developments. The public safety committee reviewed its legislative goals at its January 12th meeting. It was recommending those goals to be included in the draft legislative program, which will ultimately go to the board of directors, as I noted at its February 20th meeting. The executive committee is asked to recommend that the board of directors approve the draft 2018 legislative program. This concludes my report, and I will be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Any questions for Victoria? We are asked to recommend to board. Do we have a motion to do that? Mr. Voss, a motion. Second from Mr. Wells. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's good. Thank you. Number 6, this is our status report, and welcoming Mr. Pizer. How are you, sir?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead and introduce him to anybody that might not know him.
So this is Mr. Peter Pizer. He represents the agency in National UCC. He has been strident in his efforts to ensure that we receive all of our funding from the coast, and that Ocean Mesa East is elevated and that folks know we're trying to do in order, and that we're also trying to secure funds for the 5, 78, and 76 to ensure that our partner has all the financial capabilities that are possible. So with that,
Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here, especially good to be here given the winter's been like on the East Coast. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to come out and talk to you. So it's an interesting morning to be with you at 3 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time. Last night, this morning, Congress passed a 2-year budget deal. It does not have detail on how money is spent in each department, but it does set the overall targets. And the headline there, from the point of view of the agenda of SANDAG, is they put in $10 billion additional infrastructure funding for the current fiscal year that we're now in and for the next fiscal year. That's being viewed by some people as a down payment on the infrastructure plan that the administration will be rolling out on Monday as a proposal for a 10-year infrastructure plan. So we'll see how that all plays out. But in the immediate debate over the fiscal 2018 current fiscal year appropriation bills, that $10 billion will probably result in some increases in funding for highways and transit through the traditional pathways, which should mean that there'll be some additional formula money coming to the region, both through highway formulas from the federal government and public transit. Unclear yet how much. but at least there'll be some, we can anticipate some bump there. And it also gives us a even stronger potential to ensure that Midcoast gets the $100 million allocation we're hoping for fiscal 18, and it gives us an opportunity to potentially go for a little bit more in this fiscal year. So that's the odd occasion when there is good news from Washington. So I just wanted to leave with that. As I mentioned on Monday, the President will lay out his proposal for an infrastructure program. We know some things about that proposal. It's going to propose that the federal government allocate $200 billion over the next 10 years. That's $20 billion a year to infrastructure. And when this program says infrastructure, it means a very broad definition that includes highways, transit, all kinds of water projects, including waterborne transportation and water and sewer. It includes broadband build out in rural areas. It includes railroad. It includes electrical transmission lines, etc., power grid. So there's a whole host of things that can qualify. The way the administration is going to lay this program out, it will largely be discretionary grant programs, so competitive grants that will emphasize the degree of non-federal commitment on each project. In their main grant program, they're going to suggest that the federal match be only 20%. So they're putting a very high premium on leveraging non-federal dollars. And just to sort of put a number on that, this $200 billion of federal expenditure over 10 years, the administration says that will leverage an additional 1.5 trillion in spending. So they're laying this out as a 1.5 or $1.7 trillion infrastructure plan. The federal component of that is $200 billion. So there'll be a lot of debate about how much you're really leveraging, and when this gets to Capitol Hill, there'll be a lot of pressure to put it in other places and change the dynamic about who gets to decide where the money goes. And that leads to one other issue that some of us were talking about over breakfast this morning. There is serious consideration in Washington to restoring the practice of earmarking transportation funding for specific projects by Congress. And sort of going back to the practice that so many of us were familiar with for so long, where members of Congress are allocating money to specific projects. The House Republican caucus is taking that issue up right now. The prohibition on earmarking that's been in place for the last 7 years or so is a creature of rules of the House Republican caucus. So there will be an opportunity to potentially change that. So we're keeping a very close eye on that. That's something we'll be talking with members of the congressional offices next week when some representatives of SANDAG will be in Washington for the conference of the National Association of Regional Councils. So a lot going on this year. We're anticipating this appropriations process for the current fiscal year to wrap up in the next 6 weeks. So that's where the $100 million for Midcoast will get decided. And then we'll be right into the process for the fiscal year beginning October 1, later in the spring. And of course, the infrastructure package will start moving. So it's going to be a big year with opportunities for increased funding. So it's going to be an interesting time in Washington. I'll leave it there, Victoria. Take questions.
Thank you very much. much. I know Victoria has this under control, but as we go back to Washington in the next on Monday or Sunday, what would you recommend our strategy be when we talk to people?
I think on the short term, I think our most important issue is we want to make sure we get that mid-coast funding, $100 million in fiscal 18. We'll be anticipating another $100 million in fiscal 19. But I think we should also not be afraid to ask for more than that. Going forward, we can definitely spend the money. The project is underway. There may be opportunities to bump that number up above the number that's in the agreement we signed with the federal government. So that's number one. Number two, I think we need to talk to our members about the infrastructure bill that they'll be taking up and sensitize them to some of the issues that will be most important to us, such as, to the extent that they want to see local funding, that we get credit for putting up Transnet revenues. There is a provision in the draft plan that's been circulated in Washington that essentially says we'll give you special credit for ballot measures you passed in 2018 and going forward. But if you passed your ballot measure, 10 years ago, you really get no special credit for using that money. That's part of how they're saying they're leveraging new money at the local level. So I think we want to sort of push back a little bit on that concept and say local money is local money. It shouldn't matter when you raised it. If you're bringing it to the table and you're finding non-federal resources, you should get the same credit for that, no matter when you passed your ballot measure. You shouldn't be punished for having been ahead of the curve. So that's one particular issue that I think we want to focus in on so that we don't find ourselves at a disadvantage in competing for grant money at the national level. So I think that's one particular thing we want to drill down on. That's a real thing. We share the concerns of every other region in the country in terms of more infrastructure, but that's an issue that's very specific, I think, to us that we want to make sure we focus on.
Okay, questions from the committee? Mary?
I had a question about the restoration of earmarking. That's not a positive, but I wanted to understand some of the historical background as to why the earmarking stopped, why they're reconsidering it now, and will that be an advantage or a disadvantage to San Diego County?
Yeah. Well, sort of historically, earmarking was around for decades as a sort of a plum that was given to top leadership of congressional committees. You really had to be the chair or the subcommittee chair in order to allocate specific money. But in the 90s, it sort of took off as a very broad opportunity for gathering support for major transportation legislation. So they would, when they were passing a big 5-year highway bill, they would allow virtually every member of the House and every member of the Senate to earmark one or more projects as a way to get 400 votes in the House for the bill or 70 votes in the Senate for the bill. So it became a very standard practice. It kept building throughout the 90s and the early part of the 2000s. And then it really got to the point where there were some excesses that attracted a lot of attention. The famous Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska was probably the most prominent example, but there were lots of examples of projects that were getting money, and the project was like on the back of a cocktail napkin kind of thing. So when the Republicans took back the House after the 2010 election. And there were a lot of new members, conservative members in the House Republican caucus. They rose up against this practice and essentially forced the House leadership to take this position of no earmarking. And so that's what we've had since 2011. The pressure is now building. A lot of members got frustrated during the Obama administration by the amount of discretionary money that was being decided by the Obama administration. As you might expect, those were mostly Republican members getting frustrated. Now you have a new administration. There's a lot of Democratic members getting frustrated by the administration having all this power over money, and Congress is getting ready to reassert its authority over this, and it's a bipartisan issue. It sort of cuts along seniority lines. The more senior members of both parties tend to be for earmarking. The most junior members tend to be against. So how's this going to play for San Diego? It's hard to say. I mean, I think we've done well in these competitive grant programs in this region with the administration deciding the money because of the strength of the projects that this region puts forward, the process that you have for developing quality projects, and the amount of local funding that's available to support them. That's all been beneficial. And we've done, quite well. At the moment, our House delegation, several of our members are in very good places in terms of their committee assignments, but they're not on the Appropriations Committee. So that's an issue in terms of, because that's where a lot of the earmarking happens. And on the Senate side, Senator Feinstein, of course, is a very senior member of the Appropriations Committee, but California's a big state. And, we keep running into this minor problem where we have 2 senators, and so does Montana. So it's a difficult problem, for her. So certainly we'll be in a position to compete for earmarking, but I think it's good for this region to still have some significant money in competitive programs where the merit of the project is really the highest value.
Okay, thank you, Ron.
Yeah, if I could on that, I remember one of our chief objections on the earmarking was back under the Borders and Corridors program, and the 905 was the top-rated project in the nation, and we could barely get enough money to just keep it on the books. And because all the money was being earmarked, and almost all of it at that time was going to Arkansas and West Virginia for the Borders and Corridors. And yeah. Yes. Yep. And so, yeah, that was, and so all the money was being sucked out already before you even looked at what was the rated programs, and ours was the top-rated program, and we just barely got enough money just to keep it on the books, much less to get anything done. So,
other questions for Peter? Thank you very much, and we look forward to the trip to Washington. It ought to be enjoyable. And good. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the report. Yeah. Item number 7 is continued. Any public comments? I don't think we have any. Our next executive committee meeting is March 9th at 9 a.m. And I think we are adjourning to the autonomous vehicle demonstration. Yes. You want to make it what?
No, it's the board meeting, your next board meeting.
Board meeting.
Oh, the board meeting.
Yeah.
Come on, John.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.